This is Sirens, a series brought to you by the ladies of Bombshell, where we dissect the institutions of American power. Join us as we sound the alarm on technology, governance, and national security issues, and maybe lure some men to their deaths. I'm Lauren DeYoung-Schulman.
I'm Rada Plump.
And we are recording this morning. Usually we are not morning recorders, but today, this is a crazy week where people are trying to get out of school. Our children are extremely done with having to get ready in the morning to do things, and just fitting it into the calendar morning was what was going to happen. So it is a nice little spring morning here in Washington, D.C. Thanks to everyone who has been reviewing us on the socials and podcast platforms, etc. That has been a true delight. It has upped our energy level considerably. So thank you. Keep going. I want to start with a question. And I'm going to confess something to you, Rada. You're not going to be happy with me. This question was inspired by, I'm not going to name it, but a bro podcast, a peer bro podcast, who was discussing in our prior lives, we did a lot of weird international travel. And one of the things they were discussing was the fact that sometimes you're in a hotel bathroom and I have absolutely no idea how to operate the shower. I cannot possibly figure this out in some way. So I went to ask instead, what is the most bizarre thing that you have encountered in a hotel while traveling? And this can be work travel or other travel.
I have two dimensions of this. Mm-hmm. One is just weird art and things. I one time was in a hotel. Actually, it was they have a similar version of this, the Hotel Monaco here in DC, that had giant animal heads on the wall, but they weren't real heads. They were ceramic casts of the heads, just coming out of the wall. And you know what you don't want to wake up to in a strange hotel when you're not sure what your time zone on and you open your eye? Weird animal ceramic head coming out of your wall.
100%.
Not great. But the weirdest thing is I feel that hotels should understand that we want privacy in bathrooms. I don't want
my God. I was thinking this too. Keep going.
Encased glass. I just want some walls. Is that too much to ask?
Yeah. There's, oh my gosh, what is the name of this hotel? It's right up on Thomas Circle. And I just stayed there for a staycation one weekend because they have a pool on the roof and whatever. It was the hot new thing at one point in time. And it has this bathroom shower area that's this fully encased in glass. Who wants this? Who thought this was a good idea? My other versions of this were, let's see. This is less strange and more sort of awesome, but also really why. We've talked about, I think, Asian hotel breakfast here before. International hotel breakfasts are always a delight. This one had a full-on charcuterie room, an entire room that you went to for the buffet in order to get your special charcuterie. And we have maybe gone past the benefits of capitalism at that point in time. The other one was the various numbers of phones that you find in hotel rooms. I'm always fascinated by the phone in the bathroom itself. I was in one, I think it was either in Dubai or someplace like that had a phone in the shower and also in the bathroom, just in case you just needed to
just in case, you never know
the conversation. This is the same hotel that when you ordered a hamburger, it had gold dust on top because that really enhances the flavor profile.
I've always wanted gold dust on my hamburgers.
Yep. It's similar to things that are going on in our lives. There's also lots going on in DC this week. We're somehow avoiding most of the conversation around the fight that's going on at the White House and everything else like that. We do have one piece of insane gossip to impart with you about the reflecting pool. So Rada, you want to kick us off on that?
I will confess that I have been slightly obsessively following this reflecting pool saga.
Yeah.
Because I both love the reflecting pool and it's just wild. So, okay, quick background. There's this reflecting pool. Many people know it, for instance, from the Forrest Gump movie where Jenny runs through it. And there are many historic events that have happened there. It's between the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument. And the key here is it's a reflecting pool. So the inside of it is deliberately painted a dark color so it reflects the other monuments around it and the sky. And it creates this sort of famous, iconic imagery. And so recently, but it has all sorts of problems. It leaks so much. It's getting old. It gets algae in it. So recently, the President Trump ordered that it be fixed up. I'll come a little bit back to that. But he asked for it to be painted American flag blue and that it was going to be done by some folks who had done work on pools in a golf club. And he's like, pools are pools. And I think everyone was a little worried that the reflecting pool was going to look like a swimming pool, which was really not keeping in the spirit of it.
No.
So here we are now. The renovation is nearing about $15 million, and I'll just note the
It's a pool.
for the pool. The contracts to resurface the pool and replace the filtration system, which have not been done yet, and will require us to repaint the repainting, were done. That skipped and the entire competitive bidding process because with this justification of unusual and compelling urgency tied to the 250th anniversary. I'll just note we've known that the 250th anniversary was coming for
250 years.
Number of years. Yes, indeed. Basically, there was this Park Service analysis that found that there's a 20% profit margin, which is about 2 to 3, maybe more times what usual federal construction work has, that it added, almost close to $1 million onto the total cost. There's a great daily episode podcast about the federal procurement process with this as an example that we should definitely dive into. But here is the part that I just want to emphasize. This speed did not actually fix the pool. So the pool leaks about 6 million gallons a year. In the Obama administration, they spent like $34 million, but that didn't permanently fix it either. So they basically did a fast, no bid coating job to treat the symptoms of this, while the structural problems actually still sit under the paint, entirely skipping the requirements. And I think the good news and the bad news is it doesn't look much different. So $15 million later, a no bid contract, a lawsuit, possibly no change in appearance. And, here we are.
So I think that with the profit margin, we should figure out some way for them to account for this. And my initial idea was they need to set up a stand nearby the reflecting pool to give away ice cream until that profit margin is eaten down to what it's supposed to be.
Oh my God.
That's the way to make up for this.
American bomb pops.
Yep. Oh, that's a great idea. All right. So I have 2 topics to return to that are familiar for It's a Drill, but I'll just start with one and then we'll talk for a minute about this weird Gywneth Paltrow situation. So first is a schedule policy career, Schedule PC. It's back. It's back. So folks will remember the rule finished back in February. So the rule is done. Basically, policy career is now the rule of the land. Let's say law of the land, rule of the land, and which is the authority that allows the executive branch to move current career civil servants to a new schedule that allows them effectively to be fired at will, because their justification is that they are policy influencing and therefore their performance matters a lot more to the president's administration. All right. So, but what they didn't do in that rule was say who actually qualifies for this. And that what was required was that agencies submit it, it go to OPM for review, OPM sent it to the president. President signs out an executive order, which is what he did last week. He sent out the EO announcing about 8,000 career employees to be basically at will, meaning they can be fired without any cause or right to appeal. The exception to that is if you believe you are fired for some sort of discriminatory reason in some way. So the administration's line on this is that they are policy influencing positions, so they need more accountability, and that. I can go in 7 million ways where that's ridiculous, and particularly for the positions that they discuss, but we've talked about this a lot before. So I just want to explain more about the ones they picked. It doesn't make any sense. So even if you just take them at their word of what they're trying to do, the ones that they selected are basically random and fairly incoherent across agencies. So OMB, where I worked before, lost about half of its staff to schedule a policy career, which if you take them at their word, okay, that kind of makes sense. VA just got a tiny percent. Public affairs specialists, and this is one that really, really got me. Public affairs specialists are deeply not policy influencing. They are in fact the opposite of policy influencing. They are a ton of them are swept up at 4 departments and untouched in others. Many scientists at EPA took a real hit, which again, I don't think that scientists should be considered policy influencing versus NOAA. Hardly any scientists got picked up. And on top of that, there's a lot of folks who I would consider to be more in more sort of management or managerial positions that are not policy influencing that got stuck up in this. So anyway, tons of inconsistency across agencies. But the real thing that I think is important to know about that is that, at least as per the rule, there's no means to adjudicate this. If there was a genuine mistake, and let's say that's possible, there was a genuine mistake in saying you're now policy career, there is not a mechanism in the rule for you to say, hey guys, this is not cool, and for them to say, oh, sorry, you are now in it. And I guess they can issue a new executive order, but there's not a means for you to do so. So the rumor is that this is the only tranche that all they're ever going to do. However, I think that what this is actually doing is setting a bad precedent of what kind of positions are policy career in order for it to go far beyond where the initial expectations were. So more to follow there.
There's something in here about due process that I feel like I could opine on, but maybe for brevity's sake, should we talk about this interview between Gywneth Paltrow and Tracy Stevens?
So I sent this to Rod. I sent Rada I don't know, I guess like the thing that they had come up with, the graphic they had come up with to advertise this.
Paltrow with the interceptor.
So it is Gywneth Paltrow and Tracy Stevens discuss the future of American defense, in which Hollywood's most charming wellness mom, sorry, I can't read, chats with Anduril's founder about love, war, God, and her very progressive husband. And it's her in white next to, what is it? It's
a like interceptor. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Drones.
So
yeah.
Rana assumed that this was fake. And I was so happy that she got to discover that this was real.
I really thought, I was like, wow, Lauren's been playing with the AI, making some crazy images for us. Okay.
Yeah.
But no, we're just in a timeline where the Goop founder and, purveyor of jade eggs interviews the founder of Anduril, I'll call it, I guess, emerging neoprime that makes autonomous weapons.
Sure.
Why not?
This is a totally normal timeline.
So I listened to the podcast yesterday and I really went through all the gamut of emotions. On the one hand, I like that we're trying to bring the conversation of the importance of the American industrial base to people who wouldn't normally think about how it impacts their lives. And Gywneth Paltrow has this, she's like, I remember moving to New York and being worried about the Russians bombing us. And I remember 9/11 and like national security is a part of your lived experience, which is, I think, really important because we do have a gap there. On the other hand, hearing them discuss the state of the American industrial base and then the Pope's comment, because again, what would be an episode of Sirens without a discussion of the Pope? Mm-hmm. The Pope's comments on, not answering prayers of people who start wars, just like fascinating kind of traveling through the mindset and thinking of these different ways of approaching national security, religion versus mysticism. And it was not what I was expecting.
I'm with you on the, I like the idea of people outside our traditional field having conversations about this. I have worry, even just before any sort of description or understanding what they talked about, just the ingredients that the two of them brought to the table, I was like, oh no. What's going to happen here? So that you actually brought up the point that I'm also fascinated by, of why the Pope is a hella influencer right now. I'm fascinated that we live in a world where the Pope is the person who is kind of driving the national conversation on a weekly basis in a way that I have, as a non-Catholic, I have not experienced in my lifetime.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting. Again, there are many things that make this fodder for cocktail conversation. But it is interesting, they have this part where they go back and forth and are like, hey, it's hard, my kids, I worry, will my kids have to explain what I do to justify it and defend their dad? Does the Pope think I'm what I'm doing is bad? And I think these are actually really important questions that people in the national security community do ask themselves about themselves all the time. And that's useful. I guess I don't know if this is the exact forum I would have come to for that discussion of light and darkness or moral certitude on your life choices.
You know, some people think of Gywneth Paltrow as a place for your place of moral certitude, I guess. There's a book in here somewhere.
There is definitely something there. I wonder what what I wonder is what prompted this.
Like, oh yeah, I mean, they probably met at a party, I guess. I don't know.
Anyway, if anyone knows, send us some side comments. How did this happen?
Yeah, we want to know. Okay, last one I want to discuss for Anduril is is a little nerd. Well, actually, these were all nerdy. This is less. There's fewer celebrities in this. OMB, another rule came out. Man, like rules really kind of rule the day. OMB dropped another rule last week and a half ago, about federal financial assistance. And it's yet again something that has built on phases of administration policy over the last year in terms of how political appointees in particular intersect with grants and other kinds of financial assistance mechanisms by the federal government. The rule does not impact things like formula grants, like big things that are just like based on a calculation you do there. It does impact pretty much all the other discretionary grants, which is really a whole lot of stuff, anything from like science to clean energy to education and health and so many things. So the pieces to know about this are, again, building on prior policy. It sets the expectation that political appointees be a final approver of such grants, which is like definitely doing more than saying the credit part out loud. Like, it's a little silly to say that political appointees have never once had influence over such grants. They have, but traditionally, particularly in the spaces of science, has not been the case, or at least not quite so openly and blatantly in the case. Second, it says that clear expectations on like these grants can be terminated at will, which is, I just want to say like very clearly, is very much no way to run a railroad, whether you're talking about grants for infrastructure. Like if you're building a bridge and the bridge is halfway done, then withdraw the grant. Well, that sucks. On science, why would you submit a more radical infrastructure requiring risky grant proposal if you knew that it was likely of being terminated? You would probably submit a safer one that was more incremental. And bunches of other pieces too, but like one really a notable takeaway is that like it basically forbids them to defer to science, to like peer review for the justification of why you would select it. Like you don't have to like ignore peer review and you don't have to overcome peer review, but peer review is not the justification for why you make a science grant. So like the downstream impact of all this is going to be a whole lot of like really interesting institutional behavior on what kinds of things end up submitted, what kinds of things are then like totally opted out in terms of like actually submitting grants, the kinds of work that federally funded grants ultimately align to. And then I think one thing interesting to watch is like they also swear up and down this is going to make grants more streamlined and faster to get out the door, which would be a great thing if that is actually the case. But all of those other pieces mean that all the things that we have come to hope for and understand around American science in particular, but also a whole lot of other things that are funded by federal grants, will radically change their expectations. So if Gywneth Paltrow can get on that for her next interview, that'd be great.
Oh my God, I would 100% listen to that.
All right, so for dumpster fires, we're back on the AI train, guys, because it was AI week. And actually, it was a slightly delayed AI week because like they were supposed to announce something and it didn't happen, but like it ultimately did happen. And aren't we all thrilled because we have the June AI policy week for an executive order and an SPM. I'll come back to that in a second. So a lot of things came out to these two documents. On the first one on June 2nd, the president signed an EO called Promoting Advanced Artificial Intelligence Innovation and Security. And a few days later, he signed an SPM on AI and the National Security Enterprise. I confess I kind of wondered if like they knew that these were coming out at the same time, or they just like suddenly realized like, oh, we've got these two things. Cool. So one of them, they've been waited for a while. We had hearing about this. The Trump administration had rescinded a lot of the Biden era controls on basically saying that like regulation kills innovation. So blah, 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 bad government, let's get out of the way. 18 months in, we are finally starting to see the administration's version of what they think an oversight architecture would actually look like. Voluntary and relatively narrow machinery that includes pre-release model reviews, classified benchmarking, new procurement rules for the Pentagon, intelligence community. And this was very, very not subtle. We've been talking for a while about how the Pentagon has been interacting with friends and family and others in the AI space. OpenAI reportedly charting a fall listing. I'm sorry. This is basically just back up. That this lands in the midst of like all that kerfluffle, but also a whole lot of the public IPOs that are coming up with OpenAI and Anthropic, and like trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars at stake here. So we want to unpack a little bit of like what these documents actually do, what changed, and what it means for AI in the coming months. And also, oh my God, NSPMs are public now? Who knew? So, Rada, let's start with like, what does the executive order actually do?
Yeah. Okay. So you should think of it as basically having two prongs. One is hardening the government and private sector cyber defenses against AI-enabled threats. And a lot of this is coming on the heels of the Anthropic Mythos announcement, but several other companies have announced that their models can do similar things. So I think there is a widespread recognition that our cyber defense needs to evolve with the AI threats. The second prong is a voluntary framework for reviewing frontier models before release. So this is really an alternative to the safety approaches taken in the Biden administration, but aimed at getting after the same thing, which is how can we minimize the risk of catastrophic issues that can come up, like the AI can help you build a biological weapon, et cetera. The headline is basically the AI developers are being asked to voluntarily give the government early access to the frontier models for up to 30 days prior to release. And the government would use that window to find and fix security weaknesses that the models could exploit or expose. And then the NSPM then builds on that to try to have things like hardening federal systems with AI-enabled cyber defenses. So CISA is going to issue new guidance for civilian agencies. Treasury standing up a cybersecurity clearinghouse within 60 days. Treasury, the Pentagon, NSA, and CISA need to establish these classified benchmarking processes to assess frontier model capabilities. This is, again, through voluntary collaboration with developers. And then there's helpfully a workforce piece in which OMB and OPM are directed to find AI cyber capabilities and expand federal cyber hiring to include this Tech Force program. Just as a little bit of a side baseball, this was supposed to get signed on May 21st, and the president pulled it back over concerns that it would get in the way of U.S. competitiveness by putting these constraints and controls in. The signed version does keep what we understand to be most of the original features, but I think it's helpful to understand that inside the administration, there was a debate over how much oversight is actually too much.
So let's talk about how this is different than what the Biden administration did. So people may remember the Biden executive order, which was over 100 pages long and painful to review and figure out how to implement overall. Rada and I both had different angles on this. How is this different, and how does it compare at all?
Yeah. So as you know, the Biden executive order was released in October 2023. It was long, dense, and complex. It was really more bluntly of a rulemaking activity than an executive order, which has its own set of implications. But I think the core structural difference is the architecture, which was much more focused on mandatory versus voluntary, and leveraging the Defense Production Act authority to require companies to report on models above certain compute thresholds and share safety test results. So the Trump executive order is voluntary. There are no compute thresholds and there are no reporting mandates. The Biden order also ran across the whole of government and covered everything from civil rights to labor markets to consumer protection to immigration. This one is basically a cybersecurity and national security document. And so I would read this much more as the administration trying to manage the downside, what they see as the biggest downside risks of AI as a security problem within its security architecture, rather than trying to proactively drive to a set of social outcomes or protect individuals based on what they see as an emerging technology. Like the underlying philosophy is pretty different. I'll also just note that there's a little bit of a change in stance here, even if it's wrapped up in this voluntary language. So recall the December 2025, there was an executive order sort of saying states can't have their own AI laws. And so this there, and then there was a March National Legislative Framework and Cyber Strategy. There's the NSPM we're going to talk about in a minute, but this voluntary language, although it's couched as voluntary, has the federal government requesting 30 days of early access when the federal government is also your compute partner, your gatekeeper for classified work for a lot of these places. We've seen what happens when companies disagree or fail to comply with requests by the federal government. So my worry is the voluntary framework is actually not, I don't see it as super problematic. And I think because this is a small number of companies, it could work. But I worry in some sense if the EO was rulemaking by executive order instead of the rulemaking process, this is regulation by relationship instead of by rulemaking, and that has its own set of risks.
Yeah, and like allows companies to say like, oh, you guys don't really need to see this, right? And which is not awesome. Or the opposite of, we don't like you, and therefore we're going to limit your business practices in some way. But I'm definitely fascinated by this more security-oriented tenor of this, because it makes me wonder about like what are the things that keep this administration up at night, which are probably not many things, but like as it related to AI, I think it's interesting. So anyway, so related to this, we have the NSPM. These are documents that come out of the National Security Council. They're signed by the president, that governs key aspects of the national security community. As I mentioned before, these are usually not unclassified, or even if they are unclassified, you usually don't release the whole thing. You release like a fact sheet around it in some way. So that's different. We're just in a different space now. But we've got NSPM 11 that was signed a few days later. What does it do?
So, this is really an effort to replace the Biden administration memorandum on AI, which was NSM 25. Also, side note, I wish we could just align on the
nomenclature. Like, we don't have to change every time. It's fine. It's all the same thing.
The letters are all the same, like 5 letters that you move around. Okay, bygone. So it's organized around 4 pillars: adoption, adaptation, assurance, and accountability. The key here, very similar to the EO, is it's oriented around accelerating adoption. So it wants to adopt fast. It wants to adapt commercial technology for mission use. And it wants to build the assurance and accountability as you go, rather than using that as a gating precondition for scaling and adoption. So there are a bunch of concrete directives in it. There's 120 days. The Secretary of Defense, the DNI, the intelligence agency heads need to overhaul procurement to rapidly onboard advanced AI models from multiple vendors. That is aimed at closing the gap between what the public can use and what national security workforce can use. It directs a build out of next-gen high-security computing facilities to run an AI system. It creates this AI National Security Strategic Reserve, which is a bench of top outside experts the government can pull in. So this is like a talent surge if you need it. And then it has 2 governance provisions that are worth flagging. One, it has the Pentagon needing to issue an updated directive on autonomy and weapon systems. So that's the 3000.09 governance policy that talks about what the use of autonomous systems in war, the oversight of that needs to look like. The second is it has agencies need to ensure that no entity can disable or degrade fielded AI systems without prior federal approval. So that second one is aimed squarely at the labs and this fear that vendors could put in kill switches into national security systems that would prevent them from working in certain conditions. I'll say, they announced this and there were agreements with a bunch of companies, including OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, AWS, Oracle, NVIDIA, and SpaceX, to deploy AI on classified network. And I'll say this, which is a lot of this actually builds on a continuous foundation in the national security apparatus that started really in 2018 in Trump 1 and has continued through the 2025 foundation, which has procurement reform, the need for multi-vendor onboarding, the need for that multi-vendor frontier capability to reach the workforce. I think the core difference with the Biden NSM was much more focused on risk management, and this one is much more focused on adoption with a parallel track of accountability and assurance rather than a sequential approach.
Last topic, given that all of these companies, or many of these companies, are lined up to go public in the coming months, which has all kinds of interesting implications, how should we read this in that context? And with, in particular, like both with that specific question, and also how would you anticipate some of these companies are reacting?
Yeah. So as you noted in the beginning, the timing here matters. So Anthropic has confidentially filed for an IPO with the SEC this month. OpenAI is reportedly running a confidential S1 process. We know that SpaceX, which absorbed xAI in February merger, is pointed at public market. So these two documents are dropping in the exact window when the companies are writing their risk factor section. So just a couple of thoughts on this. So one, hopefully for the companies, this is a demand signal. It directs multi-vendor onboarding and classified compute build-out and procurement fast lanes. So the companies can pitch this to public investors as having a clear government demand signal. Second, for better or worse, it provides some federal regulatory clarity without all of the compliance costs. So the voluntary review gives investors something they want, which is a stable, a way to stabilize the relationship between the frontier labs and the government, but without the potential costs of figuring out how you'd comply with the liability regime that direct regulations would lead. And then third, there's just this pre-release review of classified benchmarking in high security facilities, cleared personnel rules, et cetera. These are all creating barriers to entry. So for me, I think what's particularly interesting is that the companies that can play in this world are the incumbents who already have the infrastructure and relationships. If you have a voluntary regime that has 8 companies that can participate, that functions like a barrier to entry, and public investors will see that as a moat, and that's a feature. But for people interested in the defense industrial base, that's a concentration risk. That early access window gives the government visibility into your product before the customers have it. But if you're a public company the government is one of your biggest customers, you're also facing your de facto voluntary roles as a regulator, as I said before. And that's really characterizes this kind of state we have of the traditional primes, the hardware primes with the Department of Defense, where they're publicly traded. There are some regulations and FAR-based rules, but a lot of it is governed by the relationships and codependence between them. And that sort of increasing recreation of that consolidated market feels like something we were trying to avoid in this software-enabled technology, and this slides us right back into it. So like a sort of parting thought in this space is really that for industry that said for years now they did not want to be regulated and feel like they got these lighter voluntary rules, it may be that they actually have much tighter regulation than they realize, because now they're regulated by a relationship instead of by a set of rules that one can judge the standards on whether you comply or not.
One thing just as a tiny matter, building on what you were just talking about here, like one of the ways that this market has expanded to a degree is that for various reasons, founders or senior folks within these companies have at some point in time split off, gone off to do their own thing in some way. And I wonder if like this moment is then going to limit that in the future. There's not, you won't have room for feuds, or if you do have feuds, then the feuds won't be quite the same.
I guess.
All right. So we will tee ourselves up for warning signs for an interview with Meagan Metzger.
All right. Well, this week on Warning Signs, we are very excited to have a super nerdy conversation about the defense technology acquisition process. So a lot of conversations we have about national security are really about people or about policy, like the national security strategy. We spend a lot less time talking about we don't, but the general community spends less time talking about how things get built and bought, the budget process and the incentives. But that is actually the machinery that turns a lot of these priorities into real capability. And a lot of what people are concerned is quietly killing innovation. So our guest today has spent over a decade living inside that gap, Meagan Metzger founded DCODE in 2016 to do a genuinely hard thing, get commercial technology through the Pentagon's front door. And she's worked it from basically every angle. She's worked with startups on building the tech, investors on funding it through DCODE Capital, defense leaders on trying to buy it. So I can't think of anyone better to nerd out with on our conversation. Meagan, welcome to Sirens.
Thanks so much for having me. Nerding out is my happy place. So yeah, maybe the 90% of the population isn't talking about this, but I can promise you my dinners on Friday nights often include acquisition. So judge me how you want.
It's why we love you. Well, let me just start with kind of what I will characterize as the claim that's really, I think, of as at the center of your work, which is that the bottleneck for the government getting innovative solutions is not technology. So for anyone that's still convinced our problem is that we're falling behind on innovation, like talk us through, make the case. What is the real constraint for the government getting innovative solutions in the hands of people who need it, and in the case of the Pentagon, in the hands of warfighters?
Yeah, you said it pretty spot on. Like tech is kind of the easy part. Now, not to say there's not crazy, complicated capabilities that we need, but it's all the unsexy stuff that is part of the process of getting it in that's really the silent killer of innovation, like you mentioned up front, right? So we could keep pace with China on artificial intelligence, and we could have a whole different podcast about are we or are we not, and I'm sure that's your dinner conversations. But if we can't get it through the 20 policies that are blocking it from actually getting onto a system, through the contracting mechanisms that we know there's pages and pages of acquisition reform trying to tackle, if we can't move past the ATOs, I could go on and on about all of the different functions that have to come together to actually make it move through the process, then it's still just shelfware, right? It's still a sexy thing that we saw a demo of that had great promise. It just never made it to the people that needed it the most. And so it's all that unsexy stuff that I've become pretty nerdy and obsessed about, because it's not a lack of will, and it's not a lack of the ability, and it's not even a lack of authority, to be very honest. It's just understanding how to look at the problem differently and just change our day-to-day work and how we operate to actually move past all that red tape and that bullcrap.
So let's maybe stay on the machinery for a minute, because obviously when you're trying to sell to the government or trying to buy in the government, as I was, you experience it in all its splendor and glory, I'll call it. So we get these strategy documents every 4 years. We get these talks of sort of top priorities. I think you'd argue, and I'd agree, that it's really the budget structure and incentives that matter more than that strategy. So help us let's start on the budget piece, and then we'll work our way into the acquisition process. Like, help us understand what, especially in these times where we have unconventional budget processes, how does the budget actually impact ability of the Pentagon, for instance, to have innovative tech?
Oh man, okay. I'm going to summarize it in two quick ways. So the first, I would say, because of the budget process, we have to submit a budget several years in advance. Okay, so now imagine you do this for your own family, right? I'm going to submit my budget for what my family's going to need in 3 years. Well, our children are growing quickly, and Lord knows what size shirt they're going to need. Now, you would think to yourself, I'm not going to budget for a size large shirt in 3 years. But newsflash, that's my second point, is we overprescribe our budgets. So now this perfect storm of we can't predict technology. We don't know how to put a line item in that says, I'm going to need AI, or, and that's changing so fast when you don't know what it's going to be. But break, we are currently writing our budgets to say, I need a large winter jacket with pink sleeves in 3 years. So it doesn't matter if we do acquisition reform for the actual requirements in contract. We can create a contract this single day. But at the end, when it comes down to it, if your budget still says you need a large jacket with pink sleeves, you have to buy a large jacket with pink sleeves. You're not going to get the super sexy heated vest that has power in it now. You see what I'm saying? So, and it sounds so trivial. And I've long said that the budget process alone is one of our biggest sleepers when it comes to innovation. And we have PPBE reform, right? We've got it up here. That's fine and good. But legitimately, if we could just go down to the individuals that are writing the actual PE line, like the specific line, and teach them to say, I need something to keep me warm instead of I need a pink sleeve jacket, we would solve so many problems. So sometimes I think we're over engineering, we're fixing the big, large problem when some of the most obvious low hanging fruit is right in front of us that we're not actively addressing.
I love that answer because it's one of those like that is a solvable problem that we have chosen not to solve for a number of reasons. Thinking about for like that maybe the opposite side of the case where in real time there are senior leaders in the Pentagon, senior leaders in the field, there's a number of people who have agreed we want X thing. We know that this thing is a solution. We need it tomorrow. And we're super excited about it. It's an early stage, blah, blah, blah. We all agree that this should happen. And they got stalled because, not because it wasn't the right thing, but because the structure that you're describing would only let them buy the pink jacket with long sleeves as opposed to something else. Is there a real case that you can talk through that as a good example of that?
Oh gosh, I could pick 100 of them. But here's one of the things that I say is interesting. So I can tell you a couple of examples and I'll come back to it. And then more recently, I'm sure some listeners, if I have fellow budget nerds on the, listening to this, they say, yes, but whenever we actually do say we need something to keep us warm, the Hill will say slush fund.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. Totally.
Yep. And so that is a challenge. I don't want to pretend that's a trivial challenge. There's ways that we can keep the Hill informed or help them understand how actually we're going to serve your constituents better by buying the things that America actually needs. But the Hill is local politics when it comes down to it. So I think there's a gap in understanding sometimes in how to position these things so that when you do go to the Hill, you don't get rejected. So for example, if you still went and said, hey, Congress, I rewrote this thing. So now I'm going to buy something that keeps me warm. And they're like, well, what are you going to buy? And also, I'm the senator of Arizona and I don't need a jacket. You're still going to have a problem. So we've seen this with, I'm actually going to use a funny example from years ago, working on an effort to help the Air Force put small iPads onto pilots' knees so that they could access manuals via PDF instead of literally 250-pound bags of manuals on aircraft. And it was not a budgeted item, and it's a new start. And what requirement do you want me to align this to? I have no budget to spend on it because there's no line item that says I need PDF readers on iPads, right? And if you looked at their budget, Lord knows they had a million things that were that specific. What we ended up doing creatively in this case was saying, but you do have budget to print. And guess what? A PDF is just a print.
It's just printed.
We print to PDF.
We've all saved to PDF before.
Yep. We all print to PDF. Can we just revector that and call it printing via electronic printing? So that's what I'm talking about. Like, it just requires a different way of looking at it and being a little bit more creative. And it's like kind of realizing that this really is just a creative exercise at the end of the day.
Well, I think that's like a good example of like we have the most innovative tech sector probably in the world, and we can't adopt our own innovation. So kind of sitting between this world of startups, capital investors, the Pentagon, the building where a lot of the buying decision happens, where do promising technologies coming into government stall? Is it the budget? Is it the requirement? Is it confusion? Like where are the big friction points?
So I think we've made tremendous progress on a lot of the front door, right? So you're seeing a lot more of these companies get into prototype, get in on a like innovative contracting mechanism. Okay. So it's not completely solved, but we're seeing a lot more of that. Then comes the part where you go, now what? So I've gotten through my prototyping dollars. So back to the budget, I've gotten through the creative contracting, but then it's going to land in a program office's lap who then has all of those problems we just talked about. And they go, what do you want me to do with this? What budget do you want me to put it in? What contract do you want me to use when I have a sole sourced IDIQ to insert prime contractor? What skill sets am I going to need to sustain this longer term? I don't think I have the tech workforce I need. So I'm going to re-summarize that. It's a transition problem. Right? It is from prototype into the program, spending more of our energy looking at why they can't catch it. It's an innovation catching problem that's causing a lot of the friction.
When we have been, and there's many stories that we can tell right now, and you're welcome to tell some, like with the times that we have been successful on that catching problem. One of the things I'm curious about is when all the lessons learned efforts that came out of the Biden administration that you see come out of the Defense Department and elsewhere, there's all these references to here's this one cool trick that we use to do this one innovative thing. Why are those hard to copy and scale? Or maybe they aren't hard to copy and scale. So I'm curious what you think, when we have managed to get to that live, and you guys have helped do this in a really short period of time. How can that is that just not repeatable for a lot of good reasons? Or is it repeatable and we've just stopped ourselves for some reason?
I'm really curious to hear Radha's take after I give my answer on this one. As someone that also, I know, worked squarely on some of these things I'm thinking of. So I actually put it's both. So there's instances where it was done with gusto, a big personality of a leader, and waivers. And every time we use a waiver, it's not repeatable, right? So if you're saying this one time and this one time, I'm making an exception to the rule because this is critical, that doesn't tee up the next person to say, well, wait, mine's also critical. And yeah, but that was because General so-and-so really steamrolled this thing through. So that's not repeatable. On the other side, especially in the last year, just the onslaught of the ACT reform and executive orders and things some of that top cover that I think people have been nervous about is showing up in a different way, some good, some bad, right? But it comes down to fear of execution or leadership support that makes it not repeatable. So the authorities are there, they've always been there. There's models that show us it can be done and successful. But what I have found personally is if the senior leader doesn't understand it, they're going to be well, time out. This is scary. What are you doing? And they're not going to support the team below. Or the team below is going to go, I hear you. I don't know how to do this. I've never done this before. What if I screw up? And it's probably that point that's the biggest.
Yeah, I think my answer is very similar, which is I think there is no substitute for an energetic leader willing to just give an umbrella of top cover. And that is creating urgency, pushing timelines, right? It's not the exceptions. If you're a leader and you've had to use exception, it's because you haven't been able to give enough sort of risk cover to them. So I think that is one core piece that is hard to scale because it's hard always to get leaders in the right places where you need them, though that is potentially solvable. The other piece, though, is I think to Meagan's point, there is a lack of capability or understanding. Capability is too strong. A lack of understanding on how to use these tools effectively in a business as usual way. So then it takes this enormous top-down pressure, and there's just leaders, have limits to their energy. I will add, increasingly, I worry it's also a lack of literal capacity because of the cuts in particular, the acquisition workforce and contracting officers, because you can have all the authorities you want and all the top cover you have. And if you only have 3 contracting officers to write the contracts and it's an inherently governmental function, then you've just got a bottleneck.
And then they're just going to do the least common denominator, easier, right, most comfortable way. The only other thing I'd add to the things that you all just mentioned there is that using waiver is a consistent process. I'm so with you, Meagan. That cannot be the repeat solution because that means it's not scalable or repeatable. When people do the hard, maybe not harder, but newer, more innovative, more out there thing, in addition to top cover, we also need leaders who then talk about it and reward it and say that was awesome over and over and over again. And not in a like, look at this sexy thing, but in a, this should be our norm. And it's hard to find leaders who have time for that. Not because they're not good, but because it's just not necessarily natural to them and recognizing that.
And how do you then tap into that new experience to share it across the staff too, like to Radha's point. So I actually have a live example of this, of something DCODE's going through. Like, so it's interesting to we get to both advise on it and like actually solution it with the department. And then in order for us to help them do that, we have to go through the process ourselves. So we're constantly living the pain. But we just got an award with an agency, and it took 4 months to do a acquisition that should have taken literally 48 hours, like do a BPA call. Okay. But the problem was they lost all their staff in the DRP, and these literally 2 contracting people are trying to run everything through for this program. And you're saying, do this contracting creative thing that in theory is lightning freaking fast. You've never done it before. So it wasn't a lack of will. It was more like, we don't have time to try to figure out what it is that, so like on the surface, it felt like it's going to take longer to learn it than for me to just go do the thing that I know how to get done. Right. And that's, to your point, like that's going to be a hard problem to solve, because that's true. Like you look across like the numbers of contracting staff that are lost in just the Space Force and Air Force alone are like, oh, like, like, so here you now have potentially $1.5 trillion of reconciliation that you've got to spend really fast. You have no friends to help you out and use innovative authorities. If you don't, you're going to be in trouble, but also you have no top cover. And also, like, what do? We just threw everything in at once, and like, what could go wrong?
I really think the like people side, I mean, I'm biased because we did an acquisition workforce strategy when I was there, and that acquisition workforce reform is near and dear to my heart. But I do think this is an underappreciated bottleneck point, but maybe an opportunity point. And maybe I'll connect that with, as we start shifting how we're thinking about things, there are a number of opportunity points. So recently, the Pentagon stood up these portfolio acquisition executives with the idea of shifting from put one person in charge of a portfolio with the authority to move, in theory, to move money across it. Now, this, I think, helps codify the move to capability portfolio management that's been going on for the last 4 or 5 years. But I guess my question for you is like, is this helpful? Is it just a rename, a crossing out of one name and putting in another name and changing of acronyms? How do you see this portfolio acquisition executive movement?
Yeah. There is such great potential that I hope we don't squander. So I'll tell you what I'm seeing live in action, because we actually support a lot of the new PAEs across services in standing up and figuring out what to do. So I would say I'm seeing a mix. I'm seeing a handful of leaders that say, got it, I understand it, I'm going to drive it like I stole it, and I'm going to do exactly what it was intended to do. I see a handful of leaders like, got it. There's not a lot of clear left and right bounds yet, right? So like, what authority and decisions is a PAE allowed to make? They're still figuring that out. So they're kind of in a little bit of a wait and see mode. And then I've seen a couple, unfortunately, they're like, I'm just overseeing the PEOs I oversaw before. I just now have a collection of them. Like, well, then you missed the point. But where I'm seeing good, interesting progress, I mean, like, some of the work that we're doing is specifically around fiscal agility, to our previous nerd conversation, where we're saying, what is this PAE's capability? Like, not programs, what are the capabilities? And, pick on the Army. If this PAE is good at its job, why is the Army better? Why is a soldier safer, or whatever the right qual is? And let's define a capability, and then actually go look across every budget and every penny you're spending and realign it by capability, and identify opportunities to really invest in the things that move the needle for whatever that capability needs to achieve. So if you're looking at soldier lethality, I'm making up something, like, you want to know, how are you successful? Well, I saved some lives, or they're more lethal, and here's how we would measure that. And then you can look at your investments and say, is what I'm investing in actually helping me accomplish Y? And if the answer is no, maybe it's not the right investment, and we need to have the hard conversation about how to divest from things, right? But so I'm seeing some good movement, literally even just reorganizing the decisions that are getting made against programs in the PAE. And then, like I said, and others, they're just like, oh, just doing business as usual, and I'm just going to report up as a portfolio and kind of make up some fake labels. And I pray that's not the norm. But if we don't put out some guidance and guardrails or kind of a more clear authorities as we learn, as we grow, then we're going to miss this whole opportunity.
One last question for you before we close out is how, like, this very, if done successfully, very obviously butts up against officially or butts up against informally up against the Congress's authorities in terms of appropriation. And in some cases, like to the earlier point, like they see this sort of thing and they see slush fund, or they see too much flexibility, or they see things that are getting a little too flexible for their comfort. But in other cases, like you can, to your point, you can make the argument that like you're getting to better outcomes, you're getting to better savings and efficiency and so on. How, like, I guess the question is both like, how would you anticipate the Hill reacting to that execution of this? But then also, like, what can the department do to like persuade them that it's all going to be okay? Like, are there things that they could do to actually make sure that
test their arms and give them bourbon and tell them,
yeah, I think it's not a bad idea.
They're there. This will be okay. Breathe.
I mean, I would take that too. So
I would too, honestly. Yeah, I'm easy in that regard.
So I've actually seen, I have two case studies, I'll call it. I won't name the services, but one service actually went proactively forward to the Hill and said, I know what you're going to be concerned about. And here are the metrics that we're going to give you. So here's how I'm going to measure whether or not this investment's working, and the data I'm going to feed you. So I'm going to switch my budget to focus in, I'm going to pick a big topic, counter UAS. And I'm going to show you how many of those systems made it to the Red Sea in combat and how many lives were saved, but also how many jobs it created for your district because I bought a company that was coming out of, like, insert your state. Kind of making up like the action, but went forward very proactively, said, I know what you're going to say, and I know why you're concerned, and I understand your concern. Here's what I'm going to bring you. Here's what outcome you're going to be able to like go campaign against, and also look everyone straight face and say, yeah, I agree. And then, do you like this? And they got buy off and they win it. And then I've seen another service go and say, like, I smashed together all these budget lines, so I have flexibility, and not a wrong approach, just a different approach. And they got marched right back and said, absolutely not, get out of here. So some of it might be politics and dynamics of the services, because there's a lot of drama going on across the board. So you have to take that into consideration. Some of it might even be just the actual human and were they in a bad mood that day. But I think you have to really like think about it and like have that, I hate to use the word empathy, but almost just go sit in that appropriator seat and say, like, what are they being held to? When are they going to get voted out for? What's going to like look like crap on their track record? And what do they need so that I can get by them? Yeah. If it was only that easy, we'd all be.
And then bourbon and arm.
And then bourbon and arm petting.
Well, Meagan, thank you for joining us in this awesome, nerdy defense acquisition conversation. I'm sure there will be much more to talk about on Friday nights as we continue to see this evolving situation, but appreciate you.
Yeah, well, hopefully it wasn't too nerdy, but I appreciate it and always love having a conversation with some fellow nerds.
All right, for Gong Show this week, if you exist in the world today, you hopefully understand that World Cup is starting, and well, there's some machinations and craziness going on. It's still a absolutely joyful, super fun, really, 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 really cool event that will hopefully not have too many insane things happen, at least in the United States context. So I wanted to both like talk about World Cup, but also movies and television that brought soccer into our lives. And for me, that was Bend It Like Beckham.
Yeah. So soccer is, as regular listeners will know, I'm not the sports volleyist of ladies. But soccer has become an increasingly big event at our house, and our younger son in particular has many views. We, in fact, looked to see if we could go to the World Cup because he's like kind of obsessed with Mbappe and determined it would be cheaper to fly to France, stay in France somewhere, and go to an Mbappe game there sometime than it would be to try to get us World Cup tickets. So we will not be seeing the World Cup in person, but I will say, love Bend It Like Beckham.
What's his name?
My favorite part.
Jonathan Rhys, whatever his name was. Oh my God, he was so hot.
Oh,
wow,
yeah.
he was so hot. But yes, I love the entire movie. I love that. I can't remember the main character's name. But she was the main character and not Keira Knightley. Like, I loved that. And then Keira Knightley was actually kind of annoying, like deliberately so. Like, all of the above was great about this movie.
And that it was like the main character was a brown lady, which at the time was very exciting.
Super rare.
Brown lady and didn't
Yep.
like these. And that there were these like hilarious Indian scenes of like Indian aunties like commenting. There's this one that I love where it's like, get your lesbian feet out of my shoes. And there's like an auntie in the back. Lesbian? I thought she was a Pisces. Like, and for like a long period of time, the like I thought she was a Pisces would be like the end when somebody said something and you like making a joke at it. Anyway, it was a movie.
Thought she was a Pisces. I have seen that movie many, many times when I was younger. My more recent soccer media was, of course, Ted Lasso, where it's funny. I feel like I watched Ted Lasso at a point where I identified so much more with Roy Kent. Like I just like loved him like so much, and which just basically felt he was like my soul brother in some ways. And now more recently, like, you know what? Actually, it's not that I am Ted Lasso, but I should probably seek Ted Lasso more as like a role model rather than the man who like is known for just being angry all the time.
If you want to take up baking the perfect shortbread and then dusting them off and bringing them to me every day in an offering of friendship and love, I will be happy to do that for you. I will make that sacrifice.
I would be happy to do that. I would worry about our butter consumption, our mutual butter consumption.
It's fair.
Overall. So yeah, with the actual sports parts of World Cup, I will tell you, I have paid zero attention to that part. But like Rada, I had likewise looked at like, can we go to a game in Philly? And the tip I will offer listeners is I read the other day is that apparently FIFA has like held back some tickets. Like not all games are actually sold out. And actually many of the games that are like Serbia versus some other country are very much not sold out. And they are starting to release some of those tickets on resale places for like a half to a third of the price. You just have to like catch it at the right moment. That is still perhaps not worth mortgaging your house in order to go a World Cup game. However, for those who are still interested, it still may be a possible thing to be able to do. It's also like, it's cool to have it in like accessible time zones, but I do sort of miss the World Cups where like you woke up at 2 a.m. or the bars were open at like 4 a.m. and things like that to be able to go take it in.
Yes. There's a bar around the corner from us that has all of the games, you know, like live and be like, oh, this is so fun. But like it's so normal. Like the games are at 30.
It's like normal times.
It's not like 6 a.m. Like bar opens at 5. Get ready. You're like, let's go. Probably my liver can't take that.
I have, you probably have similar memories to this, like watching various sporting events in weird government buildings. But I remember one was attempted to be like a fun party in the White House Situation Room of us watching a World Cup game. And like, I'll just say very politely that like the deputies committee is not really fun people, or like maybe they are individually, but like not together. So it was just sort of like a sad trying to drink beer in the Situation Room moment of like, we all should have gone home. This was a bad idea.
Yeah, I have a similar, like there are these quad screens, if you remember, that we love at the Pentagon.
Yep.
Where you have multiple news channels and put one of the quad screen news channels on a World Cup game. And let's be honest, that's not really the watching experience you want.
No, not at all. Not in any way, shape, or form. Well, anyway, I hope whatever World Cup experiences you have over the next couple of weeks are joyful and fun and lots of screaming and yelling and beer throwing as it should be. And if you haven't seen Bend It Like Beckham before, definitely take a look.
We'll see you next time.